All right, I just went over all of this stuff about toughening up on the spending in the monologue. My next guest is going to be Senator Ron Johnson. Before I bring him on, let's hear what Elizabeth Warren has to say about all of this.
If the Republicans had not pushed just two things, the Republican tax cuts that went mostly to those at the very top and the biggest corporations, and hollowing out the IRS specifically so they could not hold wealthy tax cheats accountable, wouldn't be able to audit them. If those two things had not happened, then we wouldn't even hit the debt ceiling at any time during the first Biden administration.
Okay, my next guest is the senator from Wisconsin, Senior Senator Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
How dare you Republicans pass those tax cuts back in when Trump was president? You're the reason why we're hitting the debt ceiling.
I mean, the tax cuts that have resulted in a record level of revenue last year, $4.9 trillion. I've been trying to bring everybody up to speed on just the basic numbers. It was interesting before the omnibus vote. I was asking reporters and, quite honestly, my Senate colleagues, you know how much we spend a year? And sometimes like $1 trillion something. Well, that's discretionary spending. I said, do you know how much the total government spends? And people didn't know. I'll give you the answer: $6.3 trillion. But to put in perspective, prior to the COVID, prior to the pandemic, total spending was $4.4 trillion. You remember what I just said revenue was last year, $4.9 trillion. So had we just grown, rather than this blowout spending during COVID, hundreds of billions, trillions of that was probably wasted. Had we not ramped up spending, had we only increased spending by inflation and population growth, we'd have spent last year $5.1 trillion, revenue of $4.9 trillion, tantalizing and close to a balanced budget, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, I'm a big fan of the penny plan. I'm a big fan of talking about either the fair tax or the flat tax. You gave me some numbers when we were just chatting during the commercial break. Social Security is costing $1.2 trillion. Medicare, Medicaid, $750 billion. President Bush rightly called for a 2% privatization. Why can't we bring that up? Why is it so sacrilegious to say, well, first of all, it shouldn't even be spending. It should be in a lockbox. We know that President Johnson, unrelated, broke the lockbox seal in 1964, but maybe if we were able to privatize a portion of it, not fully privatized, it would grow without any intervention from government. It would just grow on its own tax-free. Why can't we even discuss that?
Because Democrats and the media lie anytime anybody even talks about Social Security. During the campaign, when I said, well, we really shouldn't have two parts of the budget, mandatory and discretionary, where 70% of the budget is completely off budget. We never talk about it. We never look at it. We just put on automatic pilot. That's the reason we're mortgaging our kids' future. And then that simple statement got turned into he wants to put Social Security, Medicare on the chopping block. No, I want to save it. And of course, the number one component of a solution for all these problems is economic growth. And Democrats don't even consider that. They want a tax success. That's what Elizabeth Warren wants to do. They want to snuff out economic growth. That's certainly what the Fed's doing right now because of the massive deficit spending, bringing inflation to 40-year highs. The Fed reacts, what? By crushing the economy. Again, we ought to focus on growing our economy, doing it in an inflation-free environment, and we do that by stop all the deficit spending. It's a spending problem we have. Again, going from 4.4 trillion, and okay, the pandemic's over. Why aren't we back to a more normal baseline? We're not. I think the budget for this year is nobody knows exactly, but it's going to be over $6 trillion. Why haven't we returned to a more normalized baseline? If we were doing that, we'd be close to balancing the budget.
Do you think it's the right time for Senate Republicans to stand in unison and use this debt ceiling vote, even if you're not going to get 60 votes in the Senate, to at least start the ball rolling on talking about a 1% reduction per year, maybe reforming the tax code, maybe privatizing Social Security? It seems like some Senate Republicans are just throwing their hands up, unlike the House conservatives.
Well, what we ought to be doing is supporting the House conservatives. And we held a press conference today, Senate conservatives basically making that point. The ball's in their court. We are very happy with what concessions they got out of Speaker McCarthy, and I appreciate him making those concessions. I wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal the day after my reelection, talking about how do you restore function and fiscal sanity to Washington, D.C., and it's a process. Now, I come from manufacturing. You cannot have a good product without a good process. So the process starts with passing a budget, hopefully balanced. If not balanced, you have to increase the debt ceiling, use the debt ceiling as was intended, attach to it fiscal controls, like Full Faith and Credit Act, the REINS Act, Preventing Government Shutdown Act. How about reducing the size of the federal government through Attrition Act? So those are some suggestions. And then once you have that budget passed, you set up the appropriation process where you actually bring individual appropriation bills. They're still massive, but you do it during the fiscal year prior to what you're trying to appropriate for. And so you have more thoughtful consideration of those things. That begins the process of bringing greater function and hopefully greater fiscal discipline. So it starts with the House, and then Republicans in the Senate have to support them.
100%. I got to get you on the documents. Back in August, you had the Democrats, the media, and some Republicans that were hyperventilating that what Donald Trump had done was the worst thing in the history of all things that have ever been done before. And now you have President Biden, and to a very small extent, teeny extent, former Vice President Mike Pence. But when you're looking at this issue with Biden, you've got the Democrats and the media saying, well, he gave them up as soon as he found them. He was surprised they were there. Some of these documents may go back to his time as a senator. So we're not talking about the 6 years of being vice president through his post-vice presidency. He might have been taking documents out of the skiff when he was a senator. I don't understand how we could look at Donald Trump and say this is the worst thing in the world and watch people make excuses for Biden.
Well, you understand it. We have a multi-tier system of justice. It's not equally applied, and we have a highly biased media. But what is interesting is what Miranda Devine has uncovered from the Hunter Biden laptop, that email that Hunter Biden wrote on April 13, 2014, chock full of all kinds of detailed information on Ukraine, detail that Hunter Biden did not know. He was obviously fed that information 3 days before his business partner, Devon Archer, met with Joe Biden in the White House, a few days before Joe Biden went to Ukraine and was the face of the Obama administration for Ukraine, a few days before Devon Archer and then Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma. Basically, he was fed information as a way to sell his wares to the Ukrainians, to prove his worth, why he was worth millions of dollars to Burisma, because he would have access to that type of exquisite information from a U.S. government source. That is, to me, obvious. It shows corruption. It shows the Biden family is just sleazy. And to me, that's the bigger story here.
Look, you and Senator Grassley have been, you were doing weaponizing government before it was cool. Do you think the Senate needs to investigate this as well as the House?
Well, absolutely, but Democrats won't investigate this. It's one of the reasons I ran again is, had we won the majority, I'd be chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. I'll keep pressing for investigations on this. How about the mishandling of our pandemic? Maybe I can get the chairman of that subcommittee to start investigating some of those things. But unfortunately, right now, the investigation is going to be in the House. But you understand the roadblock they're up against. The White House is already basically telling the pound sand. It'll be very difficult for them to enforce subpoenas. Andrew, I subpoenaed Christopher Wray when President Trump was president. He wanted the information released to us. We never got it. That's how difficult this is. Think of the monumental test the House has going up against Merrick Garland trying to enforce their subpoenas. So it's going to be a tough slog.